Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. One wrong move can cost you everything, but one unseen move can end centuries of bondage. Do you know that in neuroscience, the human brain can process a decision in as little as 200 milliseconds, faster than the conscious mind can even register it? That means you can make a move so quick, so subtle, and so perfectly calculated that no one will realize what happened until the entire game board is flipped. Chosen one. That's exactly what you did. You didn't just make a choice. You executed a spiritual maneuver so quiet it escaped human radar, yet so loud it shattered patterns that were centuries old. The enemy didn't even hear the door slam. They just looked around and realized the entire house had collapsed. And somehow you were already gone. They thought they were playing chess with you, but you were the one who quietly unplugged the board. And today, we're going to expose exactly how you broke every spiritual pattern with a single, invisible move, and why they'll never be able to rebuild what you've destroyed. Number one, you didn't just break the cycle, you dissolved the blueprint. You didn't just stop the cycle, you erased the very framework it stood on. That's the part people miss. Most people fight patterns by resisting them when they show up, but the truth is, as long as the blueprint still exists, the pattern can rebuild itself. It's like knocking down a house while leaving the architectural plans untouched. Sooner or later, someone will follow those plans and build the same thing again. What you did was far more permanent. You went to the source, into the unseen, and dismantled the entire structure so there's nothing left to reconstruct. This is why certain people from your past can't repeat their old tactics. They keep trying the same emotional hooks, the same manipulations, the same back and forth dramas that used to pull you in. But now it's like pressing buttons on a machine that's been disconnected from power. They're frustrated because nothing works, and they don't even fully understand why. They think you've changed, but it's deeper than that. You removed the foundation that gave their games a place to exist. Breaking the cycle at the root level means there's no longer an energetic agreement between you and the problem. Before, there was an invisible handshake, a subconscious alignment with the pattern that made it easy for it to find you. Now the handshake is gone, the agreement is void, and the doorway it used to enter through has been bricked over. This is why even temptations that used to feel overwhelming don't register in the same way anymore. It's not just willpower. It's the fact that you've cut off the pattern's oxygen supply. People rarely talk about how draining this work actually is. It's not glamorous to go into the deep, hidden places where generational pain and spiritual contracts live. It requires a level of self-awareness most people never reach, and a willingness to lose the version of yourself that used to be comfortable in dysfunction. You had to let parts of your identity die so that nothing in you would resonate with the old blueprint. That's why it's permanent. You didn't just fight the pattern. You became someone who no longer has the capacity to house it. And now the spiritual landscape around you is different. That blueprint is gone for good, and because of that, the same chains that held others for decades will never have the right to claim you again. Number two, you shifted the battlefield to a realm they can't access. You moved the battleground to a realm they can't reach, and that single shift changed everything. Most conflicts repeat because they're fought on the same territory every time. The same emotional space, the same mental triggers, the same old points of attack. That's the comfort zone of the enemy. They know the terrain, they know the weaknesses, and they know exactly how to set traps there. The problem is, as long as you keep showing up to fight in that same arena, you're fighting on their terms. What you did was break that agreement. You stopped showing up where they expected you to be and elevated the fight to a dimension they don't have access to. This isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about changing the rules so completely that the other side doesn't even know how to play anymore. You stopped operating on the emotional frequency where they could reach you. Their insults, games, and manipulations are still being sent out, but they don't land because you're no longer tuned in. It's like they're sending letters to an address you no longer live at. They're waiting for a reaction, a defense, a breakdown. But there's only silence because you're not there. That shift didn't happen by accident. You learned that energy attracts its own kind, and as long as you stayed in certain emotional states, you would be easy to find and engage. So you started raising your spiritual and mental position. That doesn't just mean being more positive. It means being intentional about where you place your focus, how you respond, and what you refuse to engage in. The higher you went, the less visible you became to the tactics that used to work on you. Now the battlefield is in your territory. You're fighting from a position of clarity, peace, and strategy, not chaos. That makes them uncomfortable because chaos was their weapon and their shield. When you refuse to fight on that ground, you strip them of both. And here's the real power in that move. When they can't reach you, they eventually have to retreat or fight among themselves because their usual source of power is gone. By moving the battlefield, you didn't just protect yourself. You turned their greatest advantage into a dead end. Number 3, you became the variable that ancient patterns never accounted for. You became the one thing the pattern could never predict, the variable it never planned for. Spiritual and generational cycles survive because they rely on predictability. They know that when certain pressures come, the same reactions will follow. They count on fear showing up in the same way, pride showing up in the same way, and pain leading to the same destructive choices. This is how the loop keeps running, by assuming that the next person in line will follow the same script without even realizing it. But you didn't. You disrupted the sequence. Where the pattern expected anger, you responded with composure. Where it expected you to give up, you persisted. Where it expected you to seek approval, you walked away from the table completely. You became the unpredictable factor that throws off the entire formula. Once that happens, the pattern can't adjust fast enough because its power is in repetition, not adaptation. This change didn't happen because life suddenly got easier. In fact, it happened in the middle of some of the toughest moments you've had. What shifted was your awareness. You began to see how every situation was trying to push you toward a pre-written outcome. You started noticing the setup before it reached the climax. And instead of going along with it, you began to break the chain link by link. Patterns aren't built to handle people who question them. They thrive in the unconscious, in people who react without thinking. The moment you became conscious of the moves being made against you, you broke the illusion that this was just the way things are. You stopped being another piece on the board and became the player who sees the whole game. Being the variable is powerful because it forces the pattern to collapse, not just in your life, but in the lives of those connected to you. Once you prove that the script can be rewritten, the curse is exposed as something that was never inevitable to begin with. Others might still follow it, but they can no longer say it's unbreakable because you broke it. You've shown that the moment a person chooses differently, the whole equation fails. That's the moment the pattern realizes it has no more control over you, and that is when it dies. Number 4, you deactivated the trigger words of your bloodline. Some families have patterns so ingrained that all it takes is one word, one accusation, or one repeated scenario to unleash years of stored-up anger, shame, or division. These are the spiritual tripwires, invisible buttons programmed over generations to guarantee a reaction. They can be certain topics that always start an argument, certain phrases that instantly wound, or certain moments in the year that never fail to bring strife. For years, these triggers worked flawlessly because no one ever thought to disarm them. Everyone just walked straight into the trap, over and over again, thinking it was normal. You broke that, and you did it without fanfare, without announcing to anyone what you were doing. You noticed the patterns, you recognized the emotional setup, and you made a decision not to take the bait anymore. It wasn't easy because those triggers were designed to feel personal. They were meant to make you defend yourself, lash out, or spiral into guilt. But instead of reacting, you stayed still. Instead of matching the energy thrown at you, you let it pass without giving it fuel. At first, this made the people around you uneasy. They pulled the lever expecting the usual explosion, and when nothing happened, they were thrown off balance. The silence, the lack of chaos, was foreign to them. But this was the point. Without the predictable reaction, the entire cycle breaks. A trigger only has power if it gets a response. By refusing to engage, you cut the wire. This kind of change is deeper than simply not letting things bother you. It's about rewiring your inner response so that the same words and situations no longer have the ability to pull you into the old emotional state. It's about healing the wounds that made those triggers effective in the first place. You didn't just stop reacting. You took away the part of you that could be provoked at all. Now those old tripwires are nothing more than empty gestures. They've lost their power, not just over you, but over the future. Because once one person in a bloodline learns to stay steady when the trigger is pulled, that emotional weapon becomes useless forever. You've made sure it can't be passed on. The game is over, and they can't even figure out when it ended. Number 5, you rewired your spirit to ignore the old summons. There's a reason some struggles feel less like random mistakes and more like something calling you back into the same trouble. Those aren't just habits, they're summons. They're invisible pulls in the spirit, designed to draw you toward the very cycles you've been trying to escape. They can come in the form of sudden urges, repeating temptations, or coincidences that seem to line up perfectly to get you back where you started. Most people don't even realize they're responding to something beyond the surface. They just feel the pull and follow it. You broke that by changing your frequency. You didn't just tell yourself to stop. You shifted the very spiritual channel you operate on so those old calls no longer connect. It's like having your number removed from a list that's been calling your family for generations. The line still exists, and the calls are still going out, but you can't hear them anymore. That silence isn't accidental. It's the result of deep inner work that reprogrammed how you respond at a spiritual level. This wasn't about willpower alone, because willpower can still hear the call. It just tries to resist it. What you did was remove yourself from the range of the signal completely. You addressed the root of why those summons had access to you in the first place. The unhealed wounds, the unresolved agreements, the subtle attractions to what you knew was harmful. You broke the hidden contracts that gave those patterns the right to call you back. Now, when the old cycle tries to lure you in, there's no reaction, no curiosity, no emotional spark that can be used as a doorway. The chain is gone and the hook can't catch you because there's nothing in you that wants what it's offering anymore. This confuses those who once had an easy path to pull you back into dysfunction. They're using the same bait, the same words, the same setups, but you don't even look twice. The power in this isn't just that you're free now. It's that the summons has lost its future hold. By removing your frequency from the range of that call, you've also ensured that it won't echo into the next stage of your life. The voice is still shouting, but for you, it will forever be nothing more than silence. Number 6, you outlived the expiration date of the curse. Some spiritual patterns don't last forever on their own. They have an expiration date. The only way they survive is by renewing themselves through the next person in line. That's why certain struggles seem to run in the family. It's not that the curse is immortal, it's that someone keeps carrying it forward, whether through choices, agreements, or unhealed wounds. The curse feeds on continuity. It expects each generation to collapse in the same spot so the cycle can start over again. You disrupted that expectation by making it past the stage where it had the most control. For some people, the breaking point is a certain age. For others, it's a season of intense hardship where the weight of the curse is at its peak. In your case, you reached the point in life where others before you gave up, fell apart, or repeated destructive pattern, but you didn't. You endured what was meant to finish you, and because of that, the curse couldn't refresh itself through you. This survival wasn't just physical, it was emotional and spiritual. You didn't just make it to the other side, you made it without allowing bitterness, addiction, violence, or self-destruction to take root in you. That's what stopped the transfer. Curses can't just attach themselves without consent. That consent is often given unknowingly, through our agreement to keep reacting in the same old ways. You denied that agreement, and in doing so, you closed the gate it was trying to pass through. Now the curse is stranded. It tried to wait you out, banking on history repeating itself, but you went beyond its limit. You lived past the point where it had influence, and it can't leap forward because you aren't carrying it anymore. You didn't hand it to your children, your relationships, or your community. You starved it of the one thing it needs to live, a willing host. This is why your life may feel lighter now, even if everything isn't perfect. That invisible pressure that used to hover over certain seasons is gone. You've outlived its reign, and because of that, it can't touch the future. You broke its chain, not by fighting it head on, but by refusing to fall before its time limit ran out. And now, that expiration date has passed forever. Number 7, you refuse to play the villain in their script. Some cycles survive because someone is always willing to play the role they've been assigned. In toxic family systems, broken relationships, or spiritual battles, there's often an unspoken script that everyone knows by heart. You were expected to be the villain, the one who loses control, makes the wrong decision, or says the words that give them ammunition to paint you as the problem. They needed that version of you so the pattern could keep running and their narrative could stay intact. You ended that by refusing to step into the role, no matter how many times they tried to provoke you. They tried to bait you with the same insults, set you up in the same traps, and recreate the same situations where they could point and say, "See? They're exactly who we said they were." But you didn't give them the reaction they needed. You stopped delivering the lines they wrote for you. This wasn't about staying silent just to look good. It was about actually changing on the inside, so their attacks no longer connected. When they tried to hit the old you, they found out that person didn't exist anymore. And without that person, their whole production fell apart. The arguments they had rehearsed in their head suddenly had no opponent. The scenes they wanted to replay had no energy to feed on. The more you refused to perform, the more awkward and empty their script became. The truth is, some people and spiritual patterns can only exist if you agree to be a certain character. When you stop playing that part, you rob them of their main plot line. You don't just ruin the scene, you end the entire story they were trying to tell. And once that story collapses, they have two options: confront their own role in the dysfunction, or find someone else willing to step in. You chose to rewrite your role so completely that even if they wanted to keep the drama going, they couldn't. You didn't just refuse the part. You burned the costume, erased the lines, and walked off the stage entirely. And without your cooperation, the play didn't just slow down, it stopped for good. Number 8, you learned the language of patterns, and then spoke in silence. Patterns don't just operate randomly. They have a language. It's made up of cues, tones, attitudes, and moves that are designed to trigger a specific reaction. Once you understand that language, you realize that every conflict, every manipulation, every repeat of history is following a script. It's like a code where certain words or behaviors are meant to unlock your anger, fear, guilt, or compliance. For most of your life, you responded without even knowing you were speaking back to it. But at some point, you began to see the pattern for what it was. You noticed how the same emotional hooks kept showing up. Even if the faces or situations changed, you learned that a certain tone in their voice wasn't just how they talk. It was bait. You recognized that a certain kind of apology wasn't actually reconciliation. It was an invitation back into the same loop. Once you could see the structure behind it, you realized you had a choice: keep responding and keep the pattern alive, or stop speaking its language entirely. You chose silence, but not the kind that comes from fear or avoidance. This was a deliberate, calculated silence. Every time you refused to respond, you were sending a message. This code doesn't work on me anymore. That lack of reaction wasn't emptiness. It was a complete shutdown of the pattern's communication system. Without your response, the loop lost its fuel. What made this so powerful is that you weren't just biting your tongue. You were breaking the agreement at the root. True silence in the face of a pattern isn't about pretending you're unaffected. It's about genuinely disconnecting from the need to engage at all. The part of you that used to feel the urge to defend yourself, explain yourself, or retaliate was no longer there to be activated. And when a pattern loses its language, it loses its authority. If it can't get you to speak back in the way it expects, it has no leverage over you. That's why this silence was so disruptive. It wasn't weakness, it was fluency. You learned the system so well that you could dismantle it without saying a single word. In the end, your quiet didn't just end conversations, it ended the control those conversations once had over your life. Number 9, you removed the energy source it fed on. Some patterns don't survive on their own. They're not self-sustaining forces. They're parasites. They need a constant supply of emotional energy to keep running. That energy might be your fear, your outrage, your guilt, or even your desperate need to be understood. As long as you kept feeding it with reactions, it stayed alive. The moment you stopped, it started dying. The tricky thing about parasitic patterns is that they make you believe your reaction is necessary. They convince you that you have to defend yourself, that you must explain your side, or that you owe them a certain response. Every time you engage, even when you think you're standing your ground, you're giving it the very attention it's designed to feed on. That's why it kept coming back stronger. You were unknowingly keeping it alive. You broke this by cutting off the energy supply entirely. You stopped explaining yourself to people who didn't want understanding. You stopped letting your fear dictate your moves. You stopped giving your outrage away for free every time someone poked at your peace. And because you no longer gave it what it wanted most, your emotional involvement, the pattern began to wither. It didn't die with a dramatic crash. It didn't even announce its end. It faded quietly, losing strength day by day, until one moment you realized it was gone. The people or forces behind it might still be trying the same tactics, but without your energy attached, those tactics are hollow. They can't get the same rise out of you, and that lack of reaction makes them powerless. The beauty of this is that it didn't require a war. It required detachment. By choosing where your energy goes, you became the one in control. And here's the thing. Once a parasitic pattern dies from starvation, it doesn't regenerate in the same way. Without a host, it can't rebuild. You didn't just weaken it temporarily, you removed its lifeline for good. By the time they noticed what happened, it was too late. The parasite was already dead and you had already moved on. They were still looking for a fight, but there was nothing left to fight with. The power was gone because you had taken it back. Number 10, you disrupted the spiritual economy they depended on. Some spiritual patterns operate like a black market economy. There's always an exchange happening, but it's not money being traded. It's emotions, power, and influence. Pain is handed over in exchange for control. Shame is collected in exchange for silence. Fear is harvested in exchange for compliance. Every time you give in to one side of the deal, you're paying into their system, keeping it alive and functional. You broke that by refusing to engage in the trade at all. You stopped giving pain in response to their manipulation. You stopped accepting shame as the price for keeping the peace. You stopped letting fear buy your decisions. This wasn't just about walking away. It was about shutting down the market entirely by making their currency worthless to you. When you do this, the power shift is immediate. Their economy thrives on predictability. They know exactly what to offer or demand in order to get your reaction. They'll stir up conflict to harvest your anger. They'll press on old wounds to make you cave in. But when you refuse the transaction, you remove their ability to gain anything from you. The bait is still dangled, but you're not biting. The invoice is still sent, but you're not paying. The moment you made this decision, their system began to collapse. A spiritual economy can't survive without willing participants. If even one key contributor withdraws, the flow is disrupted, and in your case, you weren't just a minor player, you were one of the main sources of energy they relied on. Without you feeding into it, they had to either find another supply or face scarcity. And here's where it gets interesting. When they realize they can't get their payment from you anymore, they often start turning on each other. The system begins to cannibalize itself because the scarcity of resources creates desperation. You didn't just remove yourself from harm, you destabilized the entire operation. Now they have nothing to bargain with when it comes to you. They can try guilt, threats, or manipulation, but none of it has currency in your world anymore. You set the terms of engagement, and in your terms, their economy doesn't exist. The trade routes are closed, the market is empty, and they are left holding worthless currency that will never spend again. Number 11. You changed the coordinates of your spiritual identity. Some people fight you based on a map that no longer exists. They have the coordinates to where you used to live, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And they keep aiming their arrows there, expecting to hit the same vulnerable spots. But they don't realize something crucial. The you they're targeting is gone. That version of you has been dismantled, rebuilt, and moved to a new spiritual address they don't even know how to find. In spiritual terms, this isn't just personal growth. This is a relocation. You didn't just change your behavior, you changed your atmosphere, your frequency, and your alignment. That means the attacks designed for your old self can't reach you. They're coded for a past version of your energy signature. It's like trying to send mail to a house that's been demolished. The envelope might be addressed with confidence, but it'll be returned to sender every time. This is why certain triggers no longer work. They can still press the same buttons, but the wiring underneath has been rerouted. They can still speak the same insults, but the words no longer find the same doorway into your spirit. Even the manipulations they used to rely on fall flat because you're no longer living on that frequency where they have access. When your spiritual coordinates change, you also become harder to track. In the spirit realm, your location isn't just where you are physically, it's the sum of your mindset, your habits, your alignment with truth, and your faith. By upgrading all of these, you essentially cloaked yourself from enemies who rely on predictability. They're still looking for you at the intersection of Fear Street and Doubt Avenue, but you now live somewhere between Peace Boulevard and Purpose Drive, and their GPS can't calculate a route. The most powerful part, you didn't just move away, you moved up. This is a spiritual elevation, which means even if they could see you, they couldn't reach you without ascending themselves. And because they refuse to grow, they will always be shooting arrows at the ghost of who you used to be, never realizing they're wasting their ammunition on empty air. They think they're still in battle with you, but the truth is, the battlefield they're standing on is abandoned. You've already left the war zone and built a kingdom elsewhere. Number 12. You removed yourself from their time loop. Toxic spiritual systems operate like clockwork, not random but rhythmic. There's a cycle to their warfare, an unspoken schedule they count on to keep you bound. Certain attacks would resurface at the same time every year. Certain triggers would be activated during specific seasons of your life. Sometimes it was tied to your birthday, a holiday, or even a traumatic anniversary they knew could reopen wounds. This wasn't coincidence, it was a time loop. These loops are built on predictability. The enemy studies your patterns, your emotional history, and your seasonal vulnerabilities. Once they identify when your spirit is most tender or distracted, they create a recurring ambush. It's why you might have felt like, here we go again. This always happens around this time. The truth is, they were depending on your spiritual calendar to stay synced with theirs. But you did something radical. You stepped out of their timeline. You refused to keep living according to their cycle. This wasn't just breaking a habit. It was breaking an appointment in the spirit realm. You cancelled the recurring meeting they thought they had with your downfall. You stopped showing up for the same battles, the same arguments, the same patterns. You removed yourself from the clock they were using to control you. The moment you disrupted that rhythm, their whole strategy started falling apart. Like dancers trying to perform a routine without music, they lost their coordination. The insults arrived but found no opening. The sabotage was launched but landed in an empty field. Even the spiritual traps they laid in advance expired unused because you were no longer walking into them at the usual time. Stepping out of their time loop means you've shifted to God's timing. And God's clock doesn't run on their schedule. His seasons for you are unpredictable to your enemies and perfectly protected. They can't anticipate your next move because you're no longer moving in circles. You're moving forward. Now, when they look for the old season where they could catch you weak, they find nothing but silence, no entry point, no emotional trigger, no familiar script. You didn't just break the loop, you stepped into an entirely different timeline, one where their seasons of control will never come around again. Number 13, you didn't just heal, you deleted the wound's memory. Most people think healing is when the pain stops, but in the spiritual realm, that's only half the battle. Some wounds close on the surface, yet deep within, the memory of the injury stays alive, like a dormant virus waiting for the right condition to reactivate. That's why certain words, faces, places, or even smells could once send you spiraling back into an old hurt. The body and soul remembered the trauma, and that memory alone was enough to reopen it. This is how cycles often sustain themselves. The enemy doesn't need to create a brand new attack. They just poke the scar and let your own memory do the rest. That's why, for years, you might have found yourself bleeding from wounds you thought had healed, realizing you were still emotionally tethered to old betrayals, losses, and abuses. But what happened in you was rare. You didn't just heal, you deleted the wound's memory. God went into the spiritual DNA of your pain and rewrote it. He erased the emotional file that used to store that injury's trigger points. When the enemy now tries to run the open wound program, the system returns an error message, file not found. This level of healing is dangerous to your adversaries because it removes their favorite weapon, predictability. They can no longer count on the old cues to work. The song that used to make you cry now makes you smile. The street you once avoided is now a place you walk with peace. The person who once defined your worth no longer has a say in your identity. And here's the deeper truth. Deleting the wound's memory doesn't mean you forgot the event. It means you removed its ability to define your reactions. You retain the wisdom, the lesson, the insight, but without carrying the emotional landmine. The scar itself has dissolved into something unrecognizable to the enemy. Now, when they come with the same playbook, they discover you've upgraded your entire system. You're no longer running the old software of pain. You're operating in a new OS of freedom, one that doesn't just reject the attack, it no longer even registers it. That's when they realize this isn't just healing, this is divine reprogramming. Number 14, you became the proof that the pattern was never God's will. Some patterns survive for generations because people start believing they are holy, natural, or somehow pre-approved by God. They get wrapped in cultural traditions, family customs, or even misquoted scripture until they appear untouchable. This is just the way things are, becomes the sacred chant of those still bound by it. And in that belief, the cycle thrives, not because it's right, but because no one dares to question it. But then you happened. You didn't just survive the pattern, you dismantled it, and in doing so you shattered their favorite illusion, that this cycle was God's design. The moment you walked free, you proved it was never divine, never inevitable, never unbreakable. You became living, breathing evidence that what they called truth was nothing but a well-fed lie. This is why your freedom feels so threatening to them. because your life now functions as a contradiction to their entire worldview. Every time you smile without the weight they still carry, every time you succeed without the compromise they swore was necessary, you are exposing their pattern as counterfeit. You don't even have to speak. Your very existence now rebukes their doctrine. And here's the sharp edge of it. When someone like you breaks a pattern, you don't just liberate yourself. You make it impossible for others to keep pretending they didn't know better. Before you, they could hide behind ignorance or tradition. Now your testimony is out there, quietly dismantling every excuse. The spell is broken, and they can feel it. You have become what the pattern feared most, undeniable proof. And proof cannot be argued with. It can only be ignored or attacked. That's why some try to discredit you, distort your story, or drag you back into the old ways. They're not just resisting you, they're resisting the truth you represent. The irony, they'll call you rebellious, dangerous, or out of alignment. But deep down, they know you're the one actually aligned with God's will. You're walking evidence that His plans were always for freedom, and that the so-called holy chains they wore were forged in the wrong fire. You didn't just break a pattern, you shattered an entire system designed to keep you bound, controlled, and limited. Every move you made, every silent refusal, every shift in your spiritual identity was a calculated strike against forces that thrived on your pain, your reactions, and your compliance. You rewired your spirit to reject old summons, starved the parasite that fed on your energy, and stepped out of timelines meant to trap you in endless cycles. By refusing to play the roles scripted for you, and by dismantling the economy built on pain, shame, and fear, you collapsed the very foundation those patterns relied on. You deleted the memory of wounds that once held you hostage, and became undeniable proof that what they called God's will was never anything but a lie, meant to keep you chained. Your existence now stands as a testament to freedom, resilience, and divine truth, showing everyone who witnesses your journey that no curse, no cycle, and no spiritual trap is unbreakable when met with unwavering faith and fierce determination. This isn't just your victory, it's a revolution in the spiritual realm, a rewrite of history, and a beacon of hope for all who feel stuck in their own patterns. You've stepped into a new timeline, one where peace, power, and purpose are your coordinates. The old scripts have no hold on you, and the chains are forever broken. Keep walking boldly in this truth. Your freedom is contagious, your light unstoppable, and your story far from over. The patterns that once tried to define you now only amplify your strength. And this is just the beginning. If this message resonated with you and you're ready to break free from your own patterns, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any powerful insights coming your way. Like this video if it sparked something inside you, and drop a comment below sharing your own breakthrough or what part stood out most. Don't keep this to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear this truth today. Together, we're rewriting our stories and stepping into unstoppable freedom. Let's keep this movement going. God bless you.